Welcome to the first Looking Forward Our Way podcast program. This is Brett Johnson, and with me, as always, is Carol Ventresca. Carol, how are you?
I'm good, Brett. How are you doing?
Doing great. You know, our listeners are probably thinking, hey, this is supposed to be the Successful Encore Career Podcast. And it kind of is. We're actually expanding the Encore Career Podcast to reach past employment issues, hence the new name, Looking Forward Our Way. We're going to continue working with local nonprofits, government offices, employers, and private businesses like we did before, but we're going to expand the topics. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that as we go along. But we thought this would be a good time to kind of reintroduce ourselves and to give you our background and kind of some reasons why we're doing this. And I have a background in radio, 35 years total, 15 years on air with 20 in sales. And just the past few years, I left radio because of the changes in the radio industry. It had become less efficient for my clients, and those conversations continued into podcasting for their business. So I started my own podcast consultancy, and now today, starting a whole new podcast with Carol.
This is exciting, Brett. We've not been doing podcasting together for a few months. And so now to get back into it, it's taking us a little bit of practice, but I'm excited to see how we can continue to assist our listeners, but just expand the opportunity and the ideas.
Right, exactly. Talk a little bit about your background too, because I know people know you from Employment for Seniors, but at the same time, we really didn't dig that deep into what you're going to bring to this podcast too.
Well, thank you. I actually retired from working for the state of Ohio and the Ohio State University. I had over 30 years working with students literally from ages 18 to 80. We had wonderful programs on helping people up their skills and learn new skills, be prepared for their career search, again, at all ages of our student population. When I retired from Ohio State, I became the director for Employment for Seniors and spent over 10 years helping adults 50 and over in Central Ohio in their job search. So now I'm an encore careerist looking at my second retirement and ready to take on new opportunities, and very excited to create this new program with you, our new podcast.
We want to go over what the goal of this new podcast is. And mainly it is to focus on Central Ohio residents over 50 and all adults needing, the connection to the audience to available resources, as well as tips and suggestions on today's subjects, like covering resources in Central Ohio and try to assist those outside of our neighborhood, like free workshops and information for those moving into Medicare's open enrollment process, as an example.
Exactly. But we also want to have a little fun and see the value of the transitions that people are going through. Life is really a sequence of transitions. We're constantly changing, and we know certainly in our world today, we have to deal with a lot of change. So how do people move through those changes? We don't want to assume that a change is exclusive to us. Chances are pretty good it's happening to other people. So for instance, older adults who are now doing childcare for their grandchildren. They've already been doing caregiving for their older parents. Now there's a new phase that's going on. Is there something that we can do to help them? Resources out there that they may need. So we're hoping that this podcast is going to bring to our listeners the information to help them through transitions.
And we also want to address today's critical issues that impact lives and livelihood of those traveling their own way. Bring out issues and help find solutions and resources for you, our audience. Delve into issues with local experts. For example, given the ups and downs of the stock market, how do we ensure that we're on the right track for retirement?
We also want to help our listeners with getting cutting edge information and helping them to understand local issues and that are also possibly regional and national topics. For instance, here in our community, we're looking at smart cars and new ways for transportation. So let's look at those issues and get that information out to our audience.
And we also recognize that our world is limitless. So we want to focus on eliminating restrictions, ease the fears, and open up opportunities. Like, how will the workplace change after this pandemic? Are we becoming efficient at-home workers. We'll cover that and much, much more.
That's going to be a really interesting topic, Brett. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. And then the next phase is just like me, who's becoming an encore careerist. And let's highlight some of those stories and talk to folks who are experienced in their various fields, and they're professionals who are ready to share advice with our listeners. So let's talk about what's a gig economy look like today?
And then we're going to establish relationships between the organizations who serve this audience of over 50 to our listeners, you, the listener. For example, Medicare connectors, financial planners, the list goes on. And that's a big purpose of this whole podcast.
Right. And we're really going to continue that tradition that we've had of making sure that the resources that are out there, and there are a lot of resources in Central Ohio, our listeners have those opportunities to utilize all of the help that they can get. Brett, our audience is going to include folks in Central Ohio who are probably 50 and over. However, we know that our listeners are going to be from all over the country, and we want to make sure that we can assist them also finding those resources in their local community that could be of help to them on each particular issue. We also want to make sure that we are connecting the people who serve those audiences, sell to those audiences, and are part of those audiences, and make sure those connections are strong.
Well, Carol, some of the issues and the topics and the trends that we're going to cover are issues that adults over 50 have been facing in today's world. We've broke them up into content pillars. And one, of course, we're really familiar with is we're going to continue on with the employment issue, the challenges in finding opportunities for experienced job seekers. For example, what changes in the job application process are impacting job seekers, especially now that it's mostly over Zoom.
Exactly. And Brett, those are important ideas that we would really like to make sure that our audience hears. You know, another big issue for those 50 and over is looking at retirement and how can they deal with the financial and legal implications of what's going on in our economy today. Sort of briefly, it's like, how do you make money? How do you save money? How do you spend money? And how do you protect your money? You know, what happens if one of our children loses their job and we're suddenly now having to provide them with funding for their family? Lots and lots of issues that are going on out there that we want to make sure we've covered.
Yeah. And, technology is another big issue we're going to be talking about. It's so woven into the fabric of our lives now, especially through the pandemic time. But we were using technology a lot before we had the work from home and safe from home situation. So we're going to still continue on that because we're growing in this technology of how to use it, to find it, to buy it, why we need it. For example, how to best use Zoom and what does file sharing mean? And is it best to use a tablet or a laptop? What are those scenarios? And we're going to dive deep into that to make technology not such a mystery to our audience.
Exactly. And you've promised you're going to teach me all those apps that you keep talking about. Is that right?
There you go.
There you go. So, okay. Well, another issue that all of us are really dealing with during our current pandemic is healthy living. What are the resources that are out there to help us with a healthy lifestyle? We talked about, grandparents and caregiving and technology. Well, how about technology and medical care? What do we do in terms of loneliness and social isolation? How can we help people become healthier adults and enjoy that next chapter?
And housing still continues to be an issue at every age level, quite frankly. And now we're looking at this downsizing for yourself and others, the affordability of senior housing, still supporting children by relocating. I mean, we're going to answer those questions of how do you downsize? You don't want to throw away all the stuff, and none of it belongs to me, Joy. So how do you get through that process as just one example of how we get through this housing situation?
Exactly. And Columbus has a very significant housing situation, and folks are always talking about the cost of rent for young people, but rent for older folks is just as bad. We've also got this catch-all. We're saying that, sort of the world is our oyster and we want to discover new topics, but there are going to be a lot of things out there that we want to talk about that may be just one-time opportunities for discussion because they're timely. So we want to talk about things like the elections and the census, volunteering and giving back to your community, ways to attend classes or workshops that are free or very affordable, and things you could do, right from home. So there, we've got lots and lots of things that are on our list of topics to cover.
Well, here are some details about the podcast. Our podcast can be posted twice a month. You can find the podcast always on our website, lookingforwardourway.com, or on any podcast platform. It'll be an Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google Podcasts. The show notes will include hot links to resources and information, details on the program. We'll even, when we can, connect you with the materials mentioned in the program. And our contact information, tell you what, we'd love to hear from you on new ideas, topics, everything. Again, our website, lookingforwardourway.com, or you can email us anytime, hello@lookingforwardourway.com.
We just want to thank all of the listeners, those who are continuing to join us in our new podcast, Looking Forward Our Way. And we're excited that we're going to be expanding and looking into so many new topics and new areas of interest. We are also really hoping to hear from you. And if you have any questions, please let us know. And again, our email is hello@lookingforwardourway.com.